Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer Sky Bridge. This is a new little thing that we're putting forth where we're just going to do a little bit of video analysis of some of the cutting edge things and current events that are, impacting our daily lives. And one of the areas where we've seen a lot of activity as of late has been with this so-called alternative right or alt-right movement. And it started raising its head in the arena of social media. And as you know, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have engaged in social media too. It's how we've started getting our show to go out and been able to reach you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. But there's something to be said about the alt-right and what it stands for. And one of the things it does stand for is this idea of a nation being based on its racial identity. And what that means really doesn't make much sense in the United States. It may make sense for a nation like Japan that has been homogeneous since its origins. I mean, Japan has had one singular imperial dynasty for well over 1,000 years now, and their DNA is very singular. It's not the same in the United States. It never was. The United States started off as a colony, and in fact it started off as 13 colonies. That's why on the United States flag there's 13 stripes. It was for the original 13 colonies, and not everyone was from England. Some were from the Netherlands, some were from Germany. We were a hodgepodge of people. And that's what's so brilliant about what our founding fathers had set about creating when they went about establishing this nation. And part of their infinite wisdom and foresight was that they had determined that it wasn't race, it wasn't gender, it wasn't anything like that. Of course, they didn't universally agree on everything. It was a great fight. In fact, our entire system's based off of something known as the Great Compromise, which was the two bicameral houses, meaning there's two houses in our federal legislature. The House of Representatives, that's based on population, that's how you determine the numbers in it, and that's why districting is so important. And then there's the Senate, based on just having two for each state. But we see that people like Ramsey Paul has come forth and said that we really do have a race-based thing, and that the Constitution was just meant for a particular race. But I don't recall that being in any of our foundational documents. I don't recall that being part of the Constitution, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is the supreme law of the land. Instead, I recall it being based off of these natural law tenets, meaning things that are universally understood, written on the hearts of all of us as humanity. In fact, that's one of the great things about the natural law philosophy, is that anyone can understand it. It can be universally understood by applying human reason and logic. That's truly unique. It's truly something that had never been done before. It's part of that Enlightenment era thinking, but so many in the alt-right or alternative right believe that the Enlightenment era had just really torn us apart, had really gone about to destroy this notion of each individual group or race having some particular importance. And it doesn't make sense, because they try and put it in a caste system, which says certain races and certain groups are superior just based on their skin color. And that really is, in my opinion, a backwards way of thinking. A way of thinking that really shouldn't be embraced in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. It's just an ugly thing that should be put away into the rubbish bin of history where it belongs.
So I'm sure you've heard the story. Colin Kaepernick, he's a very rich multimillionaire quarterback for the 49ers, and he refused to stand for our national anthem because he was supporting Black Lives Matter or something like that. And today, President Obama supported him. And how outrageous is that? Because, Colin, if you're listening, my father, he served in the military and he fought to preserve your freedom to disagree. So when you stand, it doesn't mean you agree with all the policies of the United States, but you support our country. And we all need to come together on that, no matter Republican or Democrat, that we're all Americans supporting the good red, white, and blue. So what do you guys think of that? I got my blue check mark on Twitter. I am so happy. And I want to be mainstream now, so that was kind of like my promo tape for maybe The Blaze, maybe even National Review. How does that sound? It sounds pretty convincing, doesn't it? But see, as a member of the alt-right, I support Colin Kaepernick. I do. It makes sense because he is saying that, no, some red, white, and blue piece of cloth does not represent my people. My people are Africans, African Americans. Even though he's half white like Obama, he identifies with Africans. That's his nation. The United States is his country. His nation is Africans. Now, because he's black, he can do this, and all the media is cheering him on. Even the President of the United States, which is really damn weird, right? But see, the left, they have this whole image that, no, we're the radicals. We're fighting against the man. Even though we've had a black president for 8 years, we're basically becoming a one-party state, Democrats, but they still think they're fighting against the white man. So they make this into this, oh, what a brave, courageous thing to do. There's really no courage, right? Because he's not going to be kicked off the team. If a white guy did it, saying, I'm not going to stand for the national anthem because of how many murders against white people that happen in interracial crime, it's horrible. If a football player did that, he would be kicked out of the league so fast, it'd make your head spin. So it depends. We have free speech if you're an African descent, but don't try it, kids. Don't try it if you're white. You'll be banned. But the problem I have with the mainstream conservatives is that they're kind of like a cargo cult mentality. And you guys can Google if you don't know what cargo cult is. It was basically 50, 60 years ago, these savages, these white men came in and gave gifts to the savages in the South Pacific. And they were real primitive, so they didn't know how it really worked. So they built airplanes out of straw, hoping that'd make the white man come back. It's a cult. They were looking at the symbolism, not the real function. And that's the way conservatives are. They look at the flag, but if the flag, what does it represent? If it represents George Washington, John Adams, or concepts of what this country was founded as, which, like it or not, it was a white European Christian nation, that was the core of what America was. Now, if it's something totally different, why do you still give allegiance to it? And here's like a thought experiment. I'm not saying this is the way it is, but let's say in the future they were rounding up all Christians and put them in death camps. Would you still be saluting the red, white, and blue even if the United States was doing that? See, there comes a time it's stupid. You just can't worship a flag. You got to look at the ideas about what it means and where it is now. So in that sense, Colin, he realizes that. He thinks that the country doesn't represent his people, Africans. And he's bringing into the public the idea of identity, of tribalism, which every group has, but it's only wicked if white people acknowledge it. So it helps us when people like Colin do this, because it shows we're not all one people that you could switch together. We're different races. We're different nations within this country. And all nations, including white people, have the right to self-determination. So thank you, Colin. I support you. I hope all the other African Americans also refuse to stand for the national anthem. I'm behind you. Talk to you guys later.
You've seen this clip from Ramsey Paul, who's one of the top guys for the alternative right. You can get an idea of what it is that I'm pointing to here. You can get the just basic idea of what he's trying to say, and it's not a pretty thing. It's not something that works. It's not something that ties in with our foundational documents, because if you go back to the poetic language that Thomas Jefferson had penned in the Declaration of Independence, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that has its basis in the philosophies of John Locke, which is once again based on this whole notion of natural law. And one of the great aspects of natural law that I've mentioned on our radio shows and that I'm going to mention again here is this notion of law of the land and consent of the governed. That traces its origins back, at least to being codified in Western law, to a field in England known as Runnymede. This was where, in the summer of 1215, King John I, or Prince John as he's known, and Ivanhoe and Robin Hood, was forced by the landed elite in England, the baronage, to sign a document called Magna Carta. That means the Great Charter. And what the barons were trying to accomplish there was to prevent the king from being able to just pass taxes without their consent, from being able to completely just run ramshod over them. And it changed the notion of sovereignty in Great Britain, or what would become Great Britain, because it was just England at the time, from being an absolutist monarchy, meaning that sovereignty and the state were confined to the king himself. That's why you always hear in the historical records of the sovereign being the king, to king and parliament. They essentially created parliament in which taxes could not be levied without the consent of the governed, and government could not work without the consent of the governed. They also established standard weights and measurements for the determining of coinage of money, and to ensure that there were standardized values so that you didn't have different kinds of currency going forth. And we see these principles carried forth in our shared United States Constitution. For instance, in Article 1, Section 8, it states that Congress has the power to coin money and that the individual states can't. And the reason for that was, when the Articles of Confederation were in place, you had 13 separate forms of currency, because each state was thought of as an individual sovereign nation. And so that was a unique aspect, something that had not been tried before, and they determined that it just wasn't good enough. So in 1787, the delegates for the Constitutional Convention met in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. They were originally saying that what they were going to do was just amend the Articles of Confederation, but they locked all of the windows so that nobody could hear in during a very hot summer, and began the process of the Constitutional Convention. And they came forth with the longest lasting constitutional document in the entire course of world history. It was an amazing thing that they accomplished. It was something that they weren't sure was going to last, because again, it was something that had never in all of world history been attempted. And the beautiful thing they came forth with is that we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, created the Constitution in order to establish a more perfect union. But when you have writers like Edmund Kozak at the LifeZet page, which is run by Laura Ingram, or as we call her here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, Laura Inkampf, because of her almost fascistic leanings now, saying that the Constitution is a mere piece of paper, I find that staggering, particularly when he has a major in history, or a bachelor's of arts in history from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. They ought to know constitutional history, because it is out of that old British spirit of constitutionalism, that British spirit of free citizenry, that our founding fathers took it to the next logical extension, which was that the people were the sovereigns, not just parliament, not just a king, but we the people. And that's why we don't have a king or parliament. In fact, when you go back to the original foundations of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, you will find that the federal government was meant to be of limited power. In other words, it must trace its governing authority back to a power that is specifically enumerated unto it by the Constitution itself, by the clear and concise language contained within the Constitution itself. And that's something we need to get back to. It's why my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have so oft times reiterated that we have to get back to basics. And basics in this country is the Constitution. Always has been, always will be. And that will unlock the chains and shackles that have been holding back the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Once we do that, then everything falls into place as it should. Thank you for watching, folks. We'll have more of these as time goes on. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Do take care.